I grabbed some scrap pieces of walnut off my shelves and brought them over to the table saw to cut down. Before I do that, I have a confession to make. Although I'm in my late 20s, I still use those plastic command strip hooks. Yes, the ones designed for college dorms. And yes, they look terrible. That's why I'm staging an intervention today. I'm getting rid of all of them around my apartment and building some nicer looking hooks. So let's get into it. I started off by ripping one of my pieces of walnut down to remove the rough edge. And before I start throwing all kinds of weird angles and measurements at you, let's jump into SketchUp so you can actually understand what we're after. So here's a rendering of the coat rack. It consists of 5 vertical hooks and 4 horizontal supports. The horizontal supports have dados cut into them to hold the vertical hooks. And well, I guess that's about all that there is to this one, so I'll explain the process really quick. I'm going to start out with a board like this. I'll cut a few angles on it so that I can fold it up to look like one large hook, and then I can split it down into 5 individual hooks. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense, and now let's jump back into the shop. I'm going to start by making a small bevel on one end of the board that will make up the hooks. If possible, try to get a bevel gauge or something that you can lock into a specific angle so that you can reference this exact angle throughout the rest of the build. And having a bevel gauge like this is far more accurate than the scale on your table saw. Well, at least it is on mine. And before I get too far into things here, I want to let you know that I have plans that walk you step by step through this project that you can download. Those plans have all of the detailed dimensions you need and are available in full color at the link in the description below or at spencleydesignco.com. After making the bevel cut, I need to bring the blade back to 90 and separate the opposite end of the board. I can then bring the blade back to the same angle as before. I'm looking to cut a super steep bevel and my table saw blade won't tilt that far. So to achieve that angle, I'm grabbing this quick jig that I made a while back. It's basically just a sheet of plywood that slides on top of my table saw fence and allows me to safely run a piece vertically through the blade. The only trick here is to make sure the piece is clamped on tight. So now that oversized piece is cut at a few different angles, and when we fold it up, it actually resembles one of those hooks. The last angle that I need to cut here are at the end of each hook. So I need to remove this part here and this part here. This angle works out to be a 45-degree angle, so I beveled my blade to 45 and made a little sandwich with my piece on the jig from earlier. And I know what you're thinking. Why not just cross-cut this piece? Sure, you definitely could, but I'm not getting my finger anywhere that close to the blade. With all the angles cut, we need to glue the pieces together. Now, if you try to clamp this angle, the clamps will just slide right off. However, if you saved your cut-off pieces from the bevel cuts earlier, you can simply cover them with a little bit of painter's tape, apply CA glue to one side, spray a little activator on the other, and then press the two together to get an instant bond. Since this joint is mostly end grain, I take a little time to try to work the glue into all the pores, and then I can clamp everything up with the help of those clamping blocks. And while I clamp the other side, I want to remind you to check us out on Instagram. That's where we post tons of behind-the-scenes content, do giveaways, and you can see all these projects way before they make it here to YouTube. And if you like what you see, consider following us. After the glue cures, I can pry off those clamping blocks and move back to the table saw to rip this oversized hook down into 5 individual hooks. Now, I feel like it's a little sketchy trying to cut this high all at once, so I'm going to make the initial cut through the front piece and then turn the saw off. I can then back the blade height down and complete the rest of the cut to free the hook. I'll then continue to repeat this process until all the hooks are free. Now, I know the question you're already asking. Are those hooks actually strong? Well, let's test them out. So the heaviest things that I have in my shop that are easily attachable are clamps. And the first one that I put on there weighs about 10 pounds, and it held, so let's keep going. So I'd say so far so good, but let's keep going. The sawhorse finally did it, but here's a visual of how much one of those hooks can hold. And because I know you'd ask, 54.2 pounds. That's like 10 kilometers in metric. And that's plenty strong for me, but let's make them even better. So I grabbed this cheap doweling jig and lined the reference line up on the center of the hook to drill a large hole. I could then fill it with a little bit of glue and hammer in a dowel. I'll do the exact same process on the opposite side, and then I can cut the excess off with my jigsaw. In order to get that dowel nice and flush, I just sanded everything smooth. Now, you could also use one of those fancy flush trim saws, but I don't have one. With the hooks finished, it's time to turn our attention to the horizontal supports. I'll start by ripping off the rough edge from the stock. I can then cut it to its final length and rip down the 4 horizontal supports. And while I work on all this, I want to take a second to thank all my Patreon supporters. These are just some of the folks that have pledged to support me in my goal of taking this channel full time. And if you'd like to join them and get some exclusive rewards, consider checking out my Patreon page and see if it's right for you. With all 4 strips ripped, I can stagger them to get that offset look that I'm going for. Once I have an offset that I like, I can tape everything together and mark out my dado cuts. And that's where I messed up. So I had originally designed this to have 5 hooks, but since I decided to strength test one for you, I was actually down to 4. And that's not a problem, I just moved the spacing around to accommodate 4 hooks that will go on the white marks. Now there are tons of different ways to cut these dados, but this time I'm going to use my table saw and a dado stack. I'll start by removing my normal blade and building up the stack of dado blades to the width of the hook. And also don't forget to change the throat plate out to accommodate the larger blade size too. After setting the blade height to right about 3/8 of an inch, I clamped on a sacrificial fence to my miter gauge and lined the cut marks up to the blades. This sacrificial fence will help support the wood and prevent tear out from occurring, like this. And if you've never used dado blades before, just be aware that you need to move a lot slower through the blade than you usually would, and ensure that you have enough downward pressure to prevent the piece from lifting off the table. With all the dados cut, I can remove all the tape, then wait. Sorry. I had to. Alright, so with all the dados cut, I removed all the tape, and I can rip down a couple spacer strips to get a proper spacing between the horizontal supports. And when doing this glue up, err on the side of going too light, because cleaning up the squeeze out in all these tight spaces will be a real pain. A few taps of the hammer will seat the hooks in just right. Once all the hooks are in, I left it in the clamps overnight and let the glue cure. The next morning I could remove all the clamps, and after a little bit of finish sanding, I was ready for finish. I applied a few light coats of this Total Boat Gleam and satin, and then this bad boy was done. I've really been enjoying throwing in some smaller projects between the larger furniture builds that I typically do. They're an easy win, they don't take too much time, they're good use of scrap wood, and alright, who am I kidding? The only reason I built this project was to see someone in the comments say, "Nice rack." See you on the next one.